throwing shadows on our eyes.
Here's the thing. These are not like planned statements. Let's be real clear.
Yeah.
When I say something stupid, I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say before I say it. I'm just saying it, right? I don't have an off-air and on-air voice. I don't.
No.
I have me. I'm not a respected source of information, even for me.
Politics and celebrity have gone hand in hand for many years. You may be on one side or the other, but what has really polarized people is the vaccination versus the non-vaccinated. And we've seen political leaders exploit this to a degree in respective countries. But now, perhaps one of the most popular musicians out there, Neil Young, is going up against perhaps the most popular podcaster in the world, Joe Rogan. Jane Stevenson and Brian Lilly are with me to sort of unpack what's really going on here and the motivation behind all of this. Jane, you've been covering musicians for many years, and it has, of course, stepped into the realm and the world of politics as well, especially for someone like Neil Young. So this move about demanding Spotify remove all of his music or get rid of Joe Rogan, is this a smart move?
It's a smart move in terms of publicity. We are now talking about Neil Young again. He just released an album with Crazy Horse in December called Barn. I think the time has passed a long time ago where Neil Young cared about his sales. He doesn't need to worry about sales anymore. He's an artist who's been active for over 50 years. If it was anybody else but Neil Young, I might be surprised by this move, but this is a man who wrote Ohio and Southern Man in the same year, 1970. He's been involved in politics and social issues and public issues pretty much his entire career.
It's not a decision that's made in the boardrooms of America and New York City and Chicago. We got to take it back. We got to take it back. We got to get our choice back.
So I'm not surprised it's Neil Young. What will be interesting to see is if Spotify blinks. I don't think they're going to. I think Joe Rogan's contract is worth $100 million over several years. So that's a lot of money.
Brian, you and I know, we've been in this business long enough to know that ratings equals revenue. And I wasn't exaggerating when I said that Joe Rogan's podcast is arguably the most popular in the world. Jane just mentioned the $100 million exclusive contract he signed with Spotify in 2020. So this is, he gets nearly 11 million downloads per podcast, where, the conglomerate of CNN maybe gets 1 million views per newscast or per day. So does Spotify blink? And who's the big winner here?
Well, Neil Young's the big winner because, as Jane said, we're talking about him again. And I didn't know that he had released a new album back in December. And so now more people will know that as we talk about it, as other media outlets discuss it, write about it, post about it. So people get to talk about Neil Young again. But if Neil Young sticks to his guns and says it's Joe Rogan or me, then I think Spotify is just going to channel their inner Lynyrd Skynyrd and tell him they don't need him around much anyhow. And his music will be gone because Joe Rogan is doing very well for Spotify. They decided that they wanted to take on Apple in the podcast category. They signed the biggest name they could find. That's Joe Rogan. His audience has only grown since they signed that contract about 1.5 years ago.
Any medication, again, I'm not a doctor, I'm a moron. And I'm a cage fighting commentator who's a dirty stand-up comedian who just told you I'm drunk most of the time.
You just have to mention Joe Rogan and people either love him or hate him, but they click, they watch, they listen. And that is what drives Spotify's revenue model from this.
Now, Jane, one of the things that Neil Young had written in the statement, which, by the way, has now since been deleted off of his website, he said that he's very upset with the spread of misinformation from the Joe Rogan Experience, and that he is, Spotify has to choose one or the other. But we can all quibble about vaccine mandates and vaccine policies and whether or not we should get the jab. Majority of the world has been vaccinated, but there is this idea where Joe Rogan is presenting another opinion.
I didn't say I'm not an anti-vax person.
Right.
In fact, I said I believe they're safe, and I encourage many people to take them. My parents were vaccinated. I just said I don't think that if you're a young, healthy person that you need it.
There's a reason why his podcast is so popular. There's not enough, anti-vaxxers out there that are in the world that are listening to it to make it so popular. A lot of those that are vaccinated are listening too. So we may be talking so much about Neil Young right now. He may be on our minds right now. But is he sort of whistling Dixie a bit?
The fact that they removed the letter is interesting to me. Maybe they didn't know he was going to put that up. I find it hard to believe, but Neil Young is kind of a rebel. He kind of does his own thing pretty much his entire career. So I'm very interested in that part of it too. Like, how is he able to get this up? I guess it's his website. He owns it. He also has Neil Young Archives that has been a subscription service since 2019. So he has another of his own subscription service to get his music out to, and that's more for kind of hardcore fans who want full albums from like the 70s, 80s and onwards. Whereas this Spotify typically is more of a singles approach to music. Maybe he's not impressed with that service and doesn't really care. I'd be very interested to see how this develops, because it is developing now as we speak, given that letter has come down.
Brian, just last question to you with respect to Spotify. Do they fact check their content?
If I say things, I'm always going, check on that, Jamie. I don't know if that's true.
Right.
I do that all the time.
Right.
But I at least try to be honest about what I'm saying.
Do they go down that road, and are people going to be demanding that there is some sort of, editorial control put over someone like Joe Rogan, or do they just sit back and collect the money?
I think that if they try and say we're going to fact check and decide what Joe Rogan can and cannot say, that he'll be sitting back and collecting the money that they're going to pay him while his podcast either doesn't air or goes elsewhere, because he won't be tamed in that way.
If you say you disagree with me, I probably disagree with me too. I disagree with me all the time.
This idea that Neil Young wants to take his money elsewhere, he can. If listeners want to take their money elsewhere, and I've seen many progressive people say, I won't do this because of Joe Rogan's view on vaccinations. That's not the only thing he talks about. But I will add in a touch of Canadian content here, Adrian, and say, for all those progressives saying, I don't want to have to pay for things I disagree with, I give you CBC. And if I put forward that argument with them, they wouldn't like it very much. And they'd say, no, we all have to pay. Well, then, keep quiet and keep paying for Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's not going anywhere. Neil Young might, but Joe Rogan is going to keep doing what he's doing. And vaccines are just part of what he talks about. He discusses a wide range of issues. He doesn't always go with the popular opinion, but sometimes he does. And that's why people like him. He's unpredictable.
Okay, well, I'm just going to throw this out there to both of you, and I want a quick response. So it's not only just Neil Young in the musical world, Jane, that is grabbing a few headlines here and there. The one and only Eric Clapton has turned around and said that people are being hypnotized through subliminal messaging through the pharmaceutical companies in their ads to get vaccinated. Agree? Disagree? Out to lunch?
I kind of feel like it's not very subtle if it's hypnosis, because the messaging for the last 2 years has been go get vaccinated. I'm not quite sure what he's talking about. He also says in this interview that we're speaking of that he was basically in retirement a year and a half ago. Nobody really cared about Eric Clapton anymore. And this is interesting if you think about the Neil Young storyline today. He basically said now people are wanting to interview him again. They want to hear about what he has to say about vaccines, whereas they weren't that interested in his music in the last year and a half. He also says he's having kind of hard time with his family, with his wife and his 4 kids, because they're like, Dad, what are you talking about? Or, husband, what are you talking about? So I think the fact that Eric Clapton now is in the news again over this particular issue, it's interesting. He's getting people talking about himself again. And he claims that he has these beliefs, and I think he does, but it is interesting to see how suddenly we're talking about Eric Clapton again.
Brian Lilly, age can get the best of us or the worst of us at times, and in a hazy cloud. Are we being hypnotized about vaccines?
Well, I wouldn't say we're being hypnotized, but I will say that I found it easier to understand who anti-vaxxers were a few years ago when it was mostly granola crunching left-wing mothers in Southern California who refused to take their kids to pediatricians. Understood who those people were. Trying to figure out what's going on now is a bit more complicated.
Well, are you team Joe Rogan or are you team Neil Young? Log on to Facebook and Twitter. Let us know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.